here, the main parties in a private entity are, you can see on the chart, which is on the right hand side, the shareholders, the board of directors, managing directors, executive, department, employees. So now, guys, you don't have to like, again, I would say you can read this, whatever is written when you have time. But when you do KYC, of course, the first thing is you should know who are the shareholders, the name of the shareholders. Okay. If and maybe Khushbu and Harshada form a company. So shareholders, I should know, okay, Priya is the one, Harshada is the one, and Khushbu is the one. Okay. So that is first, which is key important thing, which is required when you are doing KYC to know who are they. So that is first thing. In board of directors requirement, you should know who is directing. Okay. And if you see the definition, like for the board of directors, they're responsible for the overall governance. Whenever companies formed, they will have certain section of people who will form as a board of directors in order to govern that company. So they are board of directors, shareholders, like I explained to you before, that they are people who owns the shares in the company or who forms the company. Like I come in and Khushbu come in and we have 50-50% put in and money to form a company. We become the shareholders, so that is shareholders. Then the third is managing directors or CEOs. Like they are very high level position people. They're maybe they know for day to day operations. They actually run the company. So there has to be someone head, right? You cannot be like folks coming together and they form a company. So they actually have to categorize people in order to see that the company is running in a good way, and they have a hierarchy to maintain. Like you all must be working professionals, your immediate manager or your images manager. So likewise, they have these. So you have managing directors and CEOs. Then you have an executive team. Executive teams are basically who implements the strategies and stuff. Again, I would say don't go into much of detail into this. It's just for your explanation to know what all parties are there. And then you have department heads, and they're responsible, for example, a finance department head or the compliance department head, which of course makes sure that all things are going well into place and things are managed accordingly. When I speak of KYC in this, you have to majorly concern for the shareholders, because that is a very much requirement. The board of directors, the C-level suits, executive management team, it will rarely be asked that, okay, that will rarely be a requirement for you. And departmental heads is also rarely a requirement for you. Like they are not like KYC people, they are not so much bothered to collect all this information. But yes, the first three are the major things which will be required from the KYC perspective. But if you look at all the six, you should know that, okay, these are the parties which are involved in a private company.
Can you
Any,
explain board of directors once again? The
yeah,
second
for
one.
sure. Yeah, so board of directors, they're basically responsible like for the overall, they govern the company, they make decisions, strategic decisions. They are the ones who appoint CEOs. So you don't have to worry about how much, percentage of what board of directors earnings are and all that stuff. The only requirement for you, okay, who are the board of directors? If there is a five people, okay, you need to collect that five people. Like you should know the document where these five people are listed. Just that. Like if you have an annual report which says these are the board of directors and you have 10 names, your job is done. You have 10 names, you know what the board of directors of that company are. So you don't have to go into much detail of what board of directors are from KYC perspective. But yes, in generic, they are the ones who make like strategic making decisions, who appoint CEO basically, and they oversee how the company is going or the financial performances are.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, I'll repeat, guys, I'm only speaking about from the KYC perspective. If I, of course, I could have explained more in details, but the thing which I've not done, because then it will like hamper our overall, purpose of this. But yes, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
No, ma'am, it's all clear. Actually, we all are from the, I think, commerce background, so it's all clear to us.
Yeah, agreed. Yes. Let's go ahead. So, I think that finishes up. Okay, that finishes up the private company. So I just repeat what are the things. So for private company, MOA, AOA, share certificate, you know, these are the basic requirements for the documents. And the basic people you need are the shareholders, directors, C-suits. These are the ones you need to be more concentrated on. Okay. Now, going ahead, you have a regulated entity. Okay, so when you hear regulated, okay, forget about entity. Regulated means what? Like regulated is like it is governed by somebody. Okay, it is regulated. So that is a regulated entity meaning as well. When you say an entity is regulated, that means that some body or some government body, when I say government body, is some institution or an organization or this is regulating that. And when I say regulating that, that means they're imposing some policies and procedures on them to follow in order to call it as a regulated entity. Like the statement is clear for you all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
so yeah, so that is basically the meaning of regulation, that it is governed by somebody. So now, if you see that, okay, this is a company and a company is regulated by one body, the first thing that will come in your mind is trust that, okay, they are following these policies and procedures, correct? Okay, so I have nothing to do. I blindly trust them. When you go to your Axis Bank and stuff, do you question them? No, right? Because they are governed by somebody and you have full and blind trust on them because it is a regulated body. So that means that they are following certain things and they have that policies and procedures in order to prevent any fraud, any risk. Okay. And they are very healthy financial system maintained. So that is basic a regulated entity. So when you want to do KYC on and you get a regulated entity, what is the first thing you will want, or as a requirement to collect? Can somebody tell me, like, what will be the first thing they will have to collect when a regulated entity comes into picture for KYC? Think about it. It is a regulated entity. You should know, that it is regulated. So what document we would have as the very first or main thing? Anybody? Okay, no worries. So it will be the regulation document or proof that it is regulated. How will you prove who is regulating that body, right? So you should have that proof that it is regulated by this body. Okay, so that proofs makes it sure that it is a regulated entity, because if it is not regulated, then your entity type wholly changes. It will become private entity. Okay, or maybe some other entity if they have made that entity into that. But basically, if it is not regulated or listed, it becomes a private company automatically. Okay, so the first proof you should collect is the regulation proof. And for example, in India, RBI regulates, like for in US, if you see the examples, the Securities Exchange Commission regulates or the FCA regulates. Don't like stress out yourself of what these bodies are. I will be telling you. It is just an example for you to see that, okay, because in US there are n number of regulation bodies, you cannot remember them all, and in other countries as well. So it's just that you always have a link, or you will always have an SOP where if you know that it's a US entity, so you can go and see who are the regulations and search your entity, whether they are regulated there or not. So you don't have to worry about it in order to remember. But yes, you should know that a regulated entity is, which is regulated by a governed body, and it should have a regulation document. That is for sure. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have some examples for you on the right hand side, like the banks, the insurance companies, security firms, assets, stock exchanges, and central banks. Because if they are holding that position of banks or, securities or insurance companies, or to call themselves regulated, they cannot be like just one day come up and say, okay, I will create one regulated entity. No, they have to follow so many procedures to become that, and so many documentations are done to have that regulation. So these are the firms which are mainly like must have regulation proof in order to be dealing with securities or assets managements or credit unions, because of course they're dealing with lots of money of the people. So people have to trust them in order to, give their money to them to secure. So that is why. Now so there is nothing much in regulated entity. It's just that one additional proof is the regulation proof you should have, and all the rest remains. Like, of course, they will also have all the things as the private entity things, which is there. They will have certain certificates or documentations for everything. It's just that they are regulated. Any questions on this while I move ahead for the another entity type?
No, as of now.
Thank you. Let's move ahead. What is government entity? So government entity, as you can see, like the word government says, it should be owned by government. It is a very similar meaning, like you have railways and stuff. So it is a government entity when it is wholly owned by government. Now, when I say it is a government hold entity, will it have shareholders? Like in a government company, do they need shareholders?
I think no.
Yes, that's correct. Why? Because government, they're not a private real estate company. They're just government companies. So instead of like shareholders, they will have controllers who control. So
Okay.
just the things changes that I will explain you later. But then, yes, you will not have the same requirement. My only motive for you to make go through these entity types is to tell you that when you're doing KYC and the entity type changes, the documentation changes. Just that. Okay. And so if we go through definitions on the right-hand side, which says they are typically operated with a legal and regulatory framework, and the activities are subject to public scrutiny. That means, of course, if they are government, they are government bodies, like government entities, so they have a regulatory framework, and their activities will be very obvious, it's very public scrutiny, and they derive their authorities from whatever laws and regulations and policies are established. Like a major example is Indian Railways. They are regulated by a body. Nobody can, private person can come into picture to make any rules regulations. It is like whole government thing, so you don't have to worry so much. But yes, a government entity. And you will always mostly have a government website for these entities, like .gov. So you will always be able to read, okay, if you have that website for this company, it is a government entity, because they always have that. Clear on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now let's move ahead.
Yes.
So I have some examples for you just to make a clear picture of this. Like there are examples of national federal government departments, law enforcement agencies, then you have educational institutions, public utilities, municipalities, state or government, healthcare agencies, just for you to give an example. And if I go through like very name of national federal departments, they're like a very national level, like a defense or justice, as I've stated. Then when it comes to law enforcement, it is basically with public safety, whatever laws are there. So they also form a government body. Then educational institutions like the DU universities in Delhi. So they are like educational institutions and they are a government institution. Public utilities, like you have, of course, you have all loan that you pay electricity, water bills, and public transportations. Then comes government departments, that is health, education, transportations, and all these departments, and agencies, municipalities. But I would say you don't have to go so much into details from the KYC perspective, just that you should know in glance that, okay, if an electricity or .gov site has come, or this is the one, it is a government entity. That is the whole purpose for this chart for you to, just refer. But you can always like dig into it and learn more when you have free time. Okay, I would say, uh, um, shall I move ahead, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Now is a state-owned entity. Now, I just told you what government entity is. Now, a state-owned entity is very similar. You always might get confused of what is government and what is state because they both sounds very similar. So just read this definition very clearly. The first line which says that a state-owned entity or business is either partially or wholly by a government or a state. Okay. When I say government entities, it is 100% owned by government, like railways. But when I say state-owned entities maybe hold 50% by a private institution or a company and 50% by government. And if it is more than 50% or wholly by government, then you say it is a state-owned entity. Okay. So I have certain examples for you. Um, like national oil companies. So many countries have these for an exploration, production, and distribution of oil and gas resources. Then you have national airlines, utilities, banks, transportations, like certain transportation, like airports, which have, some private people involved. And of course, the state comes into the picture. So that makes them that as a state-owned entity. Is that clear? Like, because that was the thing which I used to get confused when I initially started. Okay, state identity, how will I get to know? But because I know that I always see that who it is owned by a government more than 50%, it's a state-owned entity. Okay, so that is one thing you should remember. Is
Ma'am,
that clear,
is
guy?
state ma'am, is state-owned entity and public company are the same thing?
No, they are not. Public listed company, I will come to you like later. State is just like you can see like oil companies, like when government needs help of private people, so they come into picture and they want to make a collaboration, so they become state owned entity. Like your state may be like Maharashtra you are in, it is maybe owned some part by Maharashtra and some part by private, so that is basically a state owned entity. It is not a public listed entity for sure. I will come to public listed entity and explain to you that in detail. Maybe I don't know when the next slide it is, but yes.
Okay, ma'am.
And government, I just with my experience, I would say like state and government entities, like I said, private are the most which occur to me, and state-owned entity is also like not very frequent for you to come in KYC, but yes, they do come. So this is there. Let's move ahead if you don't have any questions, which is your next question, public listed entity, what it is. Now, in a very simple word, if I say what is a public listed entity, like they have their shares, okay, traded publicly. Like they like in private, I came along and maybe like Khushbu came along and we formed a company. It is not public, but in public limited company, there are like n number of anybody who is in the public whom you don't know can invest into the company, and their shares are publicly traded. Like if it is like maybe 2% is owned by someone, 0.1% by someone, so it is all in public. But in private, it is not the case. That is a major difference, that they are publicly traded is a business whose shares or stocks are available for trading on a public stock exchange. And when you have to do that, so what they do is whenever, like, for example, I form a company and I say I want to make my company a listed company or a public listed company, then I have to go under through a IPO, which is known as initial public offering. Okay, a process through which you offer shares to the public. And in order to be an IPO or to reach that stage to become a listed company, you won't believe you need n number of things and policies to be done to actually trade an IPO. So people actually dream of, doing their IPOs. For example, if you know recently Mama Earth did their IPOs. So in order to become that, they have to actually gain that trust, and do very much paperwork and stuff to become an IPO. And when I say paperwork, it is like they have to follow rules and regulation. They must be like having some net worth. They must be not like any other company, or like, you start with 50,000 rupees and you say, I want to do an IPO. No, there is certain limit, there is certain rules which we are not required to know, of course, from the KYC perspective, but just in general, I'm telling you. So they do that initial public offering. They offer their shares to the public invest in their shares. Okay. And of course, if the company grows, their shares amount might grow and they will give that interest. So that is basically a concept of a listed company. And when a company is listed and it is publicly, shares are distributed. So what does that comes in your mind that this company have disclosed everything, correct? They have to disclose. They have no option. Like if they are offering their shares to the public, they cannot keep their annual accounts or something very privately, which private company can. So what does that mean? That means that the risk approach is less because they have everything public. They cannot deviate. They cannot show false statements. Of course, the public can come and then sue them. So they are very much entitled to show everything. So they are very transparent, and the risk, is very less for them to be involved in any bad happenings or to, do any bad deeds, which we do KYC for, like to make an analysis. Is like whatever I explained till now, is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So for public listed company, what will be the first thing you will like for regulation I asked, what will the first document that you will look for if you got to know that okay, it is a listed entity? Anybody can explain? Okay, so the first thing they will need is yes, Harjot, you were about to say something.
Yes, ma'am. We'll check that is it listed on a stock exchange?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So the first thing you will look at whether the company is listed. That I always used to do because many a times they are delisted. Okay, so that again changes the entity type. So you have to first you got to know, okay, this is a public research company. Where is the listing proof? Of course, that document or the listing proof will only make you know that this is a listed company. Yes, I am correct. I have the document. Now let's collect the other documents for that company. Okay. So the first thing you will know is a listed company. And then for them, I have certain definitions of free float in listed entity you might come across. So I've just given you a small example. Again, I would say don't go into much of the details of it, but yes, you should know what free float is, because when you say, okay, when you are maybe going to know the shareholders or who owns which percentage, then you might go to the website and you see, okay, the shares of the ABC public listed company is a free float. So what is that? Is it refers to the shares of the company that are readily available for trading in public stock market. They are like being traded it in like anything. For example, if I've given you an example in the second paragraph, if a company has 100 million shares outstanding, okay, and 20 million of those shares are restricted, then the free float would be 80 million shares. Okay, free float is what the shares can be given to the public to like trade and do anything. So this will say that this would represent that 80% of the company's outstanding shares are free float. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So the word says it all. It is free float. That means like they can be freely traded. So that is there. And then the right hand side, if you see, you have key features of a public listed entity, which includes public ownership. Okay, so they have a very dispersed ownership. Dispersed as means like it is publicly traded. So it is not like, okay, Khushbu and I 50-50%. We know it would be like, okay, 0.00, 0.01% is owned by one person, 2% is owned by some another person, 3% is owned by another person. So that means it has very dispersed ownership. Okay. And their shares are owned by a large number of individuals, which I said as earlier, an institution who can buy and sell these shares on the stock exchange. So now they are like, it is very difficult to determine the shareholders. So mostly for this, nobody holds more than 25% as a whole. So it is just that these shares are dispersed. So you will not know the name of the people. You don't need to collect when they have 1 or 2%. You only need, when a requirement comes into place that, okay, for a listed company, you need to collect. Basically, first thing, you might also not require to collect the shareholders if it is listed. Okay, that is majorly one of the things. If it is listed, no shareholders required because they're very much sure that, okay, the risk is not there. But even I've worked in the organizations where they might require shareholding, but you will never end up getting one because the shareholdings are so small that you cannot gather all the individuals. Okay, so that is public ownership. Then, as I said, like as Harjot said, stock exchange listing, they're listed on stock exchanges. So, which platforms, like what is that platform? They are the buyers and sellers come together to trade securities. And the major examples is NYSE, NASDAQ, London Stock Exchange, Tokyo Stock Exchange. So, they must be listed there. And a third key feature is their regulatory compliance. Like I said, they have to enclose so much documentations and they have to do so much formalities in order to be a public listed entity. So they must adhere to every financial reporting standards, provide regular updates and perform financial performances. So if they are like doing that very religiously, you don't have to worry about the risk-based approach. And when it comes to KYC and you get a public listed company, it is like a win-win situation for you, to be honest. So I always used to feel very happy if I have a listed company. I know that, okay, I have to just find the proof. It is all listed. I will get everything on Google and I'm so happy with it. And it is like maybe half an hour job for me to find things because you will have everything like readily available for you to just take it out in PDF and just import. And same is the case for regulated entities for a self-checks exchange, because for a certain extent, because regulated entity will also be regulated by a governed body. And it might also have, certain things which are very readily available. So you don't have to worry about much of the documentation research in comparison to a private limited company, which is like, of course, documents are kept so much private. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And guys, let me know if you're like bored of listening to it and you want a break. You can always say, because I don't want to make this a boring, session, but I know that the first, knowing of what entity type might be like little, which is a reading thing, but then these things are very important. Okay. So, okay, this slide also have the same thing, which is the free float explained. And on the right hand side, you can see like whenever you go to stock exchange, you will see all these types of data, which you don't have to worry. I will go through them one by one when you're actually doing and researching for the KYC perspective. But yes, you can see these are the type of shares, and you have free float thing, which is there 3.41 billion, average volume, and all that thing. So don't bother about it. We will go through it. It's just for your example for now.
Actually, for
Yeah.
me, as I don't have KYC experience, it is
Okay.
going above my head.
Everything? Is it like
Not
everything?
everything. No,
Yeah.
not everything. Like I'm trying to concentrate. Can we take break for 5 minutes and
Yeah, for sure. And Khushbu, you can always let me know like where you're stuck in, because this is like I know that KYC people think is a very big thing and stuff. It is not. It is like you should know the basic steps. You have one entity, you have to collect certain documents. That's it. That's your job. Don't have to go
Might
so
be,
much into
yeah.
detail. Yeah,
Might
but
be
of
we are
course
reading
I.
that correct,
Mhm.
and might be we are reading that explanation, so it might be there is a
Yes, that is
reason.
why I don't want to get into so much detail. I have just created for you to understand. But yes, you should
Mm-hmm.
know it. Like if before
No,
entering
correct.
into a KYC field, you should know it because if someone, okay, you are doing a publicly listed entity, you should have something in your mind in order to execute it. But even if you don't know, Khushbu, I
Mm.
guarantee that if you
Mm.
know that, okay, public listed entity, I have 10 things to collect, you know the 10 names, you're good to go.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we can take a 5 minutes break, no problem at all. And I'm happy that you shared this. And I will not go much into detail. And we can always have like a second talk for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So
Ma'am,
meet
can
you
you
back.
explain?
Yeah. 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 Yes, Harjot.
Ma'am, can you explain free float again? Like, what is actually free float shares? Because in the slide where it is written share class, I'm not able to get it. Like, what is actually the float shares?
Okay. Uh, when you say public listed company, you know that a listed companies means their shares will be tradable publicly, right? It is like publicly available. It is not private. Like if I form a private company, me and Kushbu form a company, I have my 50 shares. I cannot go into market and say, okay, please buy my 50 shares or please buy my 30 shares. I will keep 20. That is not the case in private company. In public listed company, when I say free float, that means whatever the amount of that, shares are, they can just freely float or they can go from one person to another person, can own that shares whenever. For example, like in this example only, there are like for a company, I've issued 100 million shares. Okay. I'm not sharing the amount of it, but I've distributed my company to 100 million shares. And for certain company, like 20 shares, like 20 million shares, I cannot just trade publicly. So this is one of the clauses of a listed company. Will have certain restrictions that this amount of shares cannot go publicly. But yes, the rest 80 million shares, they would be like outstanding shares and they will be publicly traded. Like whoever wants it, if next day Arzu comes in or her Jot comes in and they want, okay, I want to buy this, they will buy it. If they want to transfer it to someone, they can do that. So that is like purely a meaning of free float shares. Like you don't have to dig in too much, but just understand free float means it can be freely floated. It has no restrictions and shares can move from one person to another person.
Okay, ma'am, got it.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a 5 minutes break and I will then come in like after 5 minutes and you can just join again or just pause yourself for now. Okay. See you.